It was not necessary that this should happen. It was necessary to face up to these problems rather than to allow them to accumulate forever. Now we all know, and Buddha knew, that reforming other people is probably the world's most unrewarding effort. Also a very dangerous one. But to start by improving our own natures is very important, because one of the principles of Indian philosophy, both Hindu and Buddhist, is that the individual, being a transient being, having only a few years in this world, should be more concerned with following and obeying nature than he is adjusting to human society. It is good to be adjusted, but the individual who compromises his principles in order to achieve a measure of success here is making a mistake, because he is not going to be here long enough for his measure of success to be meaningful, and he is going to depart from here with a bad burden of unfinished business. Actually, therefore, the problem sums up in a very simple way. How is the person going to understand first the nature of suffering? Buddha tells us that suffering is a very definite part of all existence, that it is caused by selfishness and ignorance. Now, selfishness is injuring yourself or others for gain. Ignorance is being instructed wrongly or not receiving the educational advantages that have descended to us from the past. Now, the educational advantages of the past are not necessarily carefully recorded in our educational institutions. When it comes to knowing the wisdom of the past, history is better than education, because history shows us our mistakes, and education tries to prove to us that that which was a mistake was not a mistake. That the real success is to keep on making the same mistakes, but making them with greater scientific assistance. Just one more step of scientific assistance, and we may not be here to make mistakes. We have not learned. So Buddha says the beginning of suffering is ignorance and selfishness. Ignorance, being improperly educated, not being taught what is true, being prepared to build a career around selfishness. So that the combination of education inspiring selfishness results in suffering. Suffering is wherever we use natural resources unwisely or without consideration for the common good. Selfishness causes us to try to monopolize resources. Such monopoly may make a few dollars in profit, but ends in suffering. The individual who tries to exploit his neighbor gains a little profit, but in the end contributes to suffering. Every action which is contrary to integrity causes suffering on the person who commits it and on others. Now, Buddha pointed out, however, one redeeming point in this, that while our mistakes bring suffering to ourselves, it does not necessarily follow that others will be injured. The only reason why others are injured is because they more or less agree with our mistakes. They think that success, as we have it, is desirable for them also, and that they in turn are likely, through self-interest, to buy the mistakes that we sell them. And as a result, suffering comes to them. Actually, each individual has a right to refrain from the causes of suffering within himself. And temptation is a form of having someone else try to convince you that you should do certain things for motives of self-interest. Where this happens, trouble comes. So the broad point of suffering is that it is the result of breaking the simple rules of life. And these rules cannot be broken without suffering. The idea that we can reconstruct the universe closer to our heart's desire, this idea is false. We have no power to control or master that which extends through the vast reaches of infinity. The space that goes on forever cannot be dominated by the human mind. What we call conquering it simply means to stick a probe in it and try to see what's there. We cannot conquer it. We cannot master it. And it's a case of trying to break rules and suffering, or deciding to keep rules and removing step by step the causes of suffering. If then we are concerned with this matter, Buddha gives us a series of examples, all of which indicate, before we get through with it, that the source of suffering within ourselves is emotional or mental or both. The mind is the cause of most suffering. It is assumed to be an infallible instrument, and it is not. The mind can make any mistake that we want it to make. It is a hired servant of our own whims. It obeys whatever will we bestow upon it. And it tries to help us to fulfill the schemes which have already dominated our consciousness. The emotions also constitute a tremendous pressure, a pressure for gratification of appetites of all kinds. And in gratification of these appetites, we compromise integrity. Everywhere we go, no one or very few people have become wise enough to know that they cannot be dishonest without pain, and that gradually the pain becomes unbearable. And yet they go to the grave with the pain and the dishonesty both intact. This is because we haven't been willing to accept on a scientific level that which was obvious to the ancients for thousands of years and is being repeatedly demonstrated to us every day of our contemporary lives. And yet there is only one consideration, and that is profit. As long as a person is willing to sell his own soul for $1, he is going to know pain, and plenty of it, because he cannot compromise the integrities within himself without physical suffering, or the integrities of his thoughts and emotions without mental and emotional suffering. Buddha was very clear on these points, and I don't think anyone has ever been able to refute him, because the obvious consequences of action are too definite. A second stamp is, of course, we know that suffering exists. Now we can begin to analyze how it operates. Therefore we say, what is suffering, and what is the cause of suffering? For example, a man devotes his life to accumulating wealth, and he succeeds. And having accumulated wealth, he feels that he has fulfilled his own destiny. But this man is already in trouble. By the time he has accumulated the wealth, the suffering has already started, and there's no way of avoiding it. In the first place, as Buddha said, the man who has is forever living in the fear of loss. someone is going to take away from him that which he has. And by taking it away from him will result in great anguish of nature for him, for the reason that he has put his happiness in his pocketbook. Who steals that makes him a beggar indeed. Now the other man, faced with the problem of money, doesn't succeed in accumulating the fortune. So he is miserable because he has not the money. The man who has it is afraid of losing it. The man who has not got it is miserable because he can't get it. And nothing is happy anywhere in the picture. It just keeps right on going. Now the ambition to have is not only leading us to the problem of a society which wishes to rob us of what we have on the slightest provocation, and puts us in the spot of inflation and all the problems of finances that we have today with unstable dollars, the world economy upside down, the unemployment rising. All of this is part of the byproduct of a false ambition in the first place. We have done it wrong from the beginning. We have made error glamorous. We have made certain procedures satisfying to the selfishness in ourselves. And when the castle we have built falls down, we are all miserable, and we look around trying to figure out who caused it, and finally lay the blame upon the devil, which he has been blamed for so many things, however, that I guess he can stand the burden better than we can. But how does it happen that for 4 or 5 or 6,000 years, back into the time of Egypt, we have followed such a pattern, fully aware that it won't work, fully aware that the price of what we have is too great for what we get out of it, and nobody changes? Still that hope, that gamble, that belief that we in ourselves will be happy with that which has made all others miserable, or that we alone are miserable because we have not got what all others are seeking. So here is a problem of suffering. And in the gaining of this today, we find that the complication of accumulation is itself a great cause of suffering in many ways. We are having more and more coronaries in middle life for successful business people. The constant struggle to accumulate, the constant effort to outwit the competitor, these are working a terrible hazard upon our healths, upon our dispositions, and upon all the personal values of living. They are impoverishing our lives, damaging our homes, and wrecking our bodies. And yet it's all in the great cause. We want to be, if possible, the richest man in the family graveyard. This is our great joy. Now, Buddha also points out that if we work like this for a whole lifetime, getting it, and we finally do get it, and it's cost us everything else beside that which we determined to get, then in the midst of all this, we wrap the curtains of our couch about us and lie down and die. We don't even live long enough to enjoy a part of what we have done. We have sacrificed life and never lived to make the sacrifice worthwhile. If we were going to live 500 years with the wealth, it might seem more useful or more reasonable to do things. But in the midst of accumulation, we drop down and out. And all that we have worked for with a lifetime, from the beginning of our schooling to the day of our death, is left behind. Why then should we make this world miserable and ourselves miserable to get something that we cannot live long enough to use? And if we do not use it, we leave it to others who haven't earned it, who either lose it or abuse it. And the story I've told of the old Roman who after he was dead used to sit as a ghost